Thanks for joining the 3Share Expert Talk series for November. So this month's topic, how to blow up your AEM project in 5 easy steps. So my name is Jess Moore. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at 3Share. I'm joined today by Paul Legan, who's a managing partner at 3Share. He's somewhat of a celebrity in AEM circles, due mostly to his powerful thought leadership, as well as his numerous successful implementations of sites, assets, and apps. I also have Rich Brown on. Rich is our other co-founder, and he serves as our CTO, and he's responsible for all things delivery at 3Share, as well as the creation of all of our technical IP around AEM and the ancillary Adobe products. So incidentally, this is one of the highest attended expert talks yet. I suspect that's probably due to the combination of interesting subject matter and kind of the charged marketing that we've done behind it. But the fact is, I think this hits a nerve in all of us, because the failure and success of an AEM project, pound for pound, has more of an impact on your brand and your business than almost any other technical initiative that you could undertake. AEM is a great product. We love it. We built a business on it. It's the de facto, leader in the space for digital marketing. In fact, Adobe was named as the only leader for digital experiences, for digital experience platforms by Forrester in their Q4 2015 report. So a successful launch of AEM will take you and your company to staggering heights, and will create a massive improvement in your ability to market to your customers and potential customers. While a failure, because of the different types of things that it touches, will turn heads so high on the food chain, you will have the undivided attention of, chief marketing officers, CEOs, who will want to know exactly what went wrong and ultimately how to avoid that again. So before we get into the bulk of the presentation and the content you guys are looking for the few of you that don't know who 3Share is, we're the digital marketing experts. We're focused 100% on the Adobe Digital Marketing Cloud. Within the Marketing Cloud, the vast majority of our business revolves around the training, consulting, and managed services for sites, assets, and apps. So we're a 3Share Day software partner. That's to say that when Adobe acquired Day Software and CQ, now AEM, we came along with that acquisition. So we've been working with this product since 2001. We have all the top-level badging that you would expect from an expert on AEM, including the specialization. We're top-level solution partner, founding member of the Adobe Partner Advisory Board. Last year, we were acquired by Publicis Group because we're recognized as the top AEM specialists in the world. Our acquisition happened just prior to their acquisition of Sapient. So we're headquartered in Carlsbad, which is just outside of San Diego. We're nestled nicely between Callaway Golf and Legoland. And while we're headquartered out here in the West, it's important to note that we operate throughout the U.S. and Canada. Hey, is that Paul or Rich on, not on mute? With the computer going off in the background? And typing? All right, thanks. The majority of our workforce is in the U.S., scattered throughout the U.S. About a third of our company is based in Argentina. At 85 people, we may seem small, but we are actually a veritable giant in the AEM space. You'd be hard-pressed to find another company in the world that could put 85 seasoned, trained AEM experts with multiple projects under their belt into a single room. For most companies, AEM is a practice. They have a handful of AEM experts and then Java generalists who have some AEM training. And project teams are mostly created based on utilization. We have the world's most streamlined portfolio of services. We provide training, consulting, and managed services for AEM. As part of our consulting and practice, we see our fair share, probably more than our fair share, of rescue ops. This is projects that got off on the wrong foot, maybe by the wrong partner, the wrong plan, whatever it might be, got wobbly. We get in and we get those projects on the road, which is straight and narrow. So I also want to take a second to shamelessly plug our AEM event, Evolve 16. It's the largest, most comprehensive AE event on the planet, geared for both business and technical audiences. It includes some amazing keynotes from executives in top brands. It has tracks focused on deploying, enhancing, and maximizing the AEM investment and some great networking opportunities. This year's event is in San Diego, August 29th through the 31st at the Hard Rock. Registration opens February 1st. So ask around, look at the reviews on CMS Wire. It is the #1 AEM event on the planet. You don't want to miss it. Quick glance at some of the companies that trust 3Share to handle their AEM needs. Let's just look at that for a quick second, but you'll recognize probably most of these brands. It tracks the Adobe's customer base pretty well, which is the Fortune 500 to Fortune 1000. So I thought we'd start with some of the macro level project stuff, more or less just kind of fun facts. Before we dive into the top 5 things that were guaranteed to blow up your AEM project. But I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Chaos Report that is made by the Standish Group. And for those of you who don't know, it's a study that's focused on project success rates. It started in 1994, and it is probably the most widely cited research on project success rates and best practices in the world. So I found the report in 1994. I found the 1994 report in 2001 when I was working in B2B. That's right. Think Ariba, Commerce One, RightWorks. These were huge, complex, ugly, mean, nasty projects that many ended in failure. And so during that time, that's when I found the report. And it was really, in that first report, it was the intro that sucked me in. It started with a quote from Tom Clancy about bridges. And in the intro, there's a section that compared bridge building with complex technical projects. And the premise is that bridges are normally built on time, on budget, and never fall down. On the other hand, we know that IT projects, complex IT projects, enterprise projects, seldom come in on time, on budget, and a number of them quite often fail. So to be fair, bridges are built so successfully now because they're engineered to the nth degree. Before anybody even sets sight or picks up a shovel to start the work on that bridge, everything is absolutely locked down. That's not the case in complex enterprise deployments like AEM. There needs to be a more flexible approach taken because you often don't have all the details or the requirements are changing. And so we use approaches to give us some flexibility and reduce risk, like Agile, like Waterfall, project management, hybrids of the two, all designed to reduce risk. Now, the report also examines the lack of postmortems done on failed projects. Anytime a bridge goes down, you can guarantee that a full investigation is going to be done. They're going to determine exactly what was the root cause of that falling down, and best practices will be put in place to show that that never happens again. Failed IT projects, failed technology projects, a lot of times people just keep moving and say, that was hard, that was ugly, We're going to hold somebody accountable. They're gone, moving on. And what ends up happening is we see a lot of these mistakes made over and over and over. So in the report, Standards tries to identify what causes the projects to fail and how to resolve those failures, how to reduce the number of failures. So in the 2015 report, 19% of all IT projects will fail in 2015. So that's 1 in 5. The nice thing is, since they started in 1994, it's gotten better. 31% of projects in 1994 they found were canceled before they finished. So also, another nice thing for the folks dialing in North America. Oh, sorry, before I hit that, they also found that the #1 reason for project failure is size and complexity. These are the most important factors in project success. I don't think anybody would dispute that, or isn't a common sense thing that would be what it is. Now, for those of us in North America, we can be happy to know that we're just a little bit better than the rest of the world at deploying projects, but not much. We have the lowest failure rate. But that's 18%. Europe, it has a 19% failure rate. Asia has a 20% failure rate, and the rest of the world has 21. Now, it seems like it is insignificant, but I think it gets more interesting when you look at the number of projects that are successful that have had challenges. At that, when you look at those numbers, about half of the North American projects had some level of challenge, whereas well over approaching 60% of the rest of the world found theirs to be a little bit more challenging. Some more good news. If you're on this call, you're on this webinar, you're focused on software that has best practice around it that has been bought from a world-class software vendor, and projects that come from companies like Adobe have a higher rate of success. Projects developed from scratch, just using code and a bunch of smart people and some requirements, have the highest failure rate. So well over half of the projects using purchase software and minimizing modifications are successful. So I guess that was the moderately fun part of the presentation. Speaking of high success rates, this is the content you guys are waiting for. Speaking of high success rates and project success, I'd like to welcome Mr. Paul Legan, Rich Brown, who will show you exactly what not to do when you're implementing your AEM project. So Paul, I'm going to go ahead and give you control here, and hopefully this works. So 1 second. I can still hear typing. Somebody's typing. And it's one of our panelists, I'm 100% sure of. Okay. You should have it now.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining. Let's get into it. So, the first way to successfully blow up your AEM project is to deprioritize or de-stress training throughout the entire process. I can't even convey how important training is, especially in the beginning of a project. Oftentimes, when education, in any project in general, this applies to AEM, but in general, when education is an afterthought, or worse, if knowledge is assumed on either side of a conversation, you introduce a gap between what is said and what is meant. And by that kind of comes to a head in terms of the initial information gathering phase of a project. Usually this is right at the beginning, and usually this is the most critical point in an AEM project. It usually starts with one group of people knowing a lot about AEM and one group of people knowing not as much about AEM. And this introduces sort of a defensiveness and a indecisiveness on functionality. And without that clear direction on where to go, especially when you're trying to lock down actual functionality for a year or two-year project, this becomes more and more important. So the biggest thing we can do is share knowledge. Let me go to the next slide here. Sharing knowledge introduces a comfort zone among all parties. And the main point, I think, the main aspect, I guess, of this in the initial part of a project is that first kickoff meeting. And again, this applies to more projects than just AEM, but it's very important because AEM has a full stack with a lot of different people involved in different roles. And so it's important that due to that large audience, there will, no doubt about it, be a meeting where you have attendees that are a mixture of non-technical and technical people. And that's why establishing a baseline of understanding, again, breeds this decisiveness across departments and across roles. It's also important to understand that learning is essentially decoding. The amount of jargon that I've probably used over the years, and I've definitely heard others use, is extraordinary. And what it does is it encodes the information that we're really trying to dispel. So a lot of times you'll be in a meeting and when people do not know what you're talking about, either you're using jargon or you're trying to solution a problem technically without first understanding everything completely, you're not providing tools for an audience to actually decode the information they're hearing. So it's lost. Me personally, I get very disinterested in something that when I don't understand what people are saying or the words that people are using. So it's very important to relate information to people in the way that perhaps will make the most impact. So when in an AEM project should you introduce training? It's been my experience, it's sort of a trick question because honestly, it's the earliest that you can introduce training and the number of times that you can do it over the course of a project really determines the success. So what we've done is in the initial kickoff meetings, we've done product demos for every single piece of functionality that a client has purchased and has shown desire to use. And then during the actual requirement sessions, we'll go through actual functionality that pertains to every single piece of functionality that started the project off in the first place. And this is really important for especially authors, because authors and authoring experience is so critical to the adoption of the CMS in general, but AEM more specifically. Then as you go through the project, we take, as Jess mentioned, sort of a waterfall, agile, hybrid approach to our development. But we do incorporate sprints. And during these sprints, we provide a demo that is not only just a demo, but it's sort of an engaging Q&A session, more so than a demo. The idea is that people will be in the product and we will have trained actual users on every piece of functionality that we've developed as each part of it, at each sprint level. However, not all training needs to be very formal, where you take 4 hours of your day and you actually deliver a training to a group of people. A lot of times it's the reinforcement of those things. I like to think of it sort of as homework. So after I give a sprint demo, I very much like to have a takeaway, a notes sort of distribution or a worksheet that goes with the demo to make sure that everyone understands exactly what we've done and what their role is on testing and also providing feedback in the best way possible. So it's probably very clear to a lot of people, but of all possible knowledge in the world, the things that you don't realize you don't know make up a vast majority of that. If you are in a situation where a client or a stakeholder says something like, I don't know what I don't know, it's because there's a lack of understanding of what can be done in a product or what needs to be done in order to get something done in the future. And this is a process that's very, very important, especially in the beginning of a project. So again, when you embed this education throughout the entire project timeline, which you can do without extending the timeline, then you get more decisive feedback, and these decisions often invest users into the actual product. That said, if you prefer no clear direction and you are genuinely looking to blow up your AEM project, then deprioritizing training is probably the best way to go. The second thing that is essentially another great way to ensure an unsuccessful project is to forego transparency. Transparency is something that's very important to tree sharing and very important, I think, in any project. And by that, I mean that at any stage of the project, it's very important to actually be aware of what you've done and what you haven't done and convey that to stakeholders. So my personal opinion, and it's been my experience, that I'll be waiting for a flight in an airport and I will actually get a notification on my phone that my flight is delayed before I'll even get any sort of visual indicator at the actual gate from an actual gate personnel person. So it's sort of funny to me that, you know, if airlines were to structure their alerts and actually prepare me for realistic wait times, I would be much less angry at flying in general. And this is very true of AEM projects too. Honesty in demos goes an extremely long way. Some tips that we generally like to convey are to use annotations to actually show which pieces of functionality are not ready for testing at any given point. We also like to provide agendas before each demo. That way people can follow along and we set expectations for exactly what's not working. It becomes very clear later on after a demo which pieces of functionality you are actively trying to avoid at any given point. And so we like to avoid all that and just be very honest with what we've done and what bugs exist and what things are still left to be done. We also have found that at the end of any demo that we give, it's very important to leave the users thinking that there is something a little bit extra that we gave them. And in this case, we like to end on a very strong note with a surprise feature. This kind of conveys to an audience, especially in an AEM project, which often spans 4 to 8 different sprints, that there's a lot that we are thinking about in each sprint, and we're trying to deliver a great product. So even if there's something that's missing, there's also something that we've tried to get feedback on sooner than we thought. So one of the first projects I was ever on with TreeShare was I was lucky enough to work with A6 America on their digital asset management project. And I was actually fortunate to follow the project along to Japan and to Australia. And one of the first meetings that I had in Japan was a status report meeting where the stakeholder in Japan looked at our status report and said, wow, that is a lot of red. And it was this moment where I thought, personally, I was somewhat freaking out. I thought this was going to be a big deal, but the reality is that people really appreciate when others are honest and open about what is going on in a project, especially when you're spending a lot of money to implement something that impacts a lot of people. And so what I've learned is that just because there's a lot of red on a status report, but there's a plan to mitigate all that red and turn it back to green, that it's a conversation that needs to be had and often results in even more rapport between two people. Because again, no one likes to be swindled, and this is critical to the success of an AEM project. So if you're not already on your way to an awful project, the next step would be to completely and utterly embrace bureaucratic inertia. And what bureaucratic inertia is, to me, it's the fact that, in general, everything that happens on a project, everything that we do, always takes longer than we anticipate. This could be accessing a VPN, or accessing specific servers, or installing servers, or converting templates, HTML templates, to AEM templates. These are the things that are always roadblocking the beginning of a project. But I think the critical thing to understand is that this is always the case, and things always take longer than we anticipate. And it's not something that we can't anticipate in general through proactivity. A lot of times we talk about proactivity as being something that is sort of the ideal state. But if you've been on several AEM projects, you kind of see that there are logical streams of development that can be completed in parallel. And if a roadblock prevents one track from moving forward, there's always an opportunity to switch to the other one. And I look to Disney to provide guidance or innovation here, because Disney is the undisputed leader in queue psychology. So if you've ever been to a Disney property, you've probably waited in line for a long time, but you've probably waited in line for slightly less time than you thought you'd have to wait in line. So Disney executives have clearly understood that people get angry when they wait in line for a long time, and they've decided to jerry-rig the system such that people feel like they're waiting in line for a lot less time. Again, this kind of led to things like the performers that walk through lines and the wait times shown actually being longer than they are. So Disney took a proactive approach to a very common issue throughout all of their properties. And you can do the same in AEM. One of the key indicators of an unsuccessful project are when we have designs that have not yet been finalized. And by designs, I mean actual desktop and mobile and tablet designs that are still in process as we start a project. This is something that you can generally avoid by mandating it as part of the design of a project plan. Second thing you can do is request all system access for all potential resources on day one. It should be the first meeting invite that you send out. And that way you ensure that everything will take much longer, but of course, if you start earlier, then maybe you can mitigate that. And lastly, it's very important to utilize progressive development for the components. When you're developing a site and you have only static HTML, let's say, it's important to give that visual as part of a demo or as part of a training, and then essentially take that static content and make it dynamic through the use of dialogues and editing controls, etc. But it's I think critical to the success of a project to show that progression from static content to dynamic, and iterating as you do. So I'm a huge baseball fan, and I've always been. And one of the first things that when the coach told me, which again I found out later was a quote from someone that wasn't him, but in life, as in baseball, think fastball and adjust for the curve. This is a quote that I've learned that I think I can't even point to a more appropriate quote in terms of AEM project management. There are so many different things that take so long, but there are so many ways to mitigate those things. And that's kind of what we see in all of our projects and what makes them successful. Now, we've all had situations where we have reacted instead of responded to a specific. Oh, I think we lost the presentation there. Give us a second here. Oh, great, thank you. Yeah, we've all had a situation where we've reacted instead of responded. And by that, I mean that we've not taken a second to think about what we're about to say before we handle a situation. And this is an absolute surefire way to make sure things do not run smoothly. And by that, I mean reacting instead of responding. And I think of a kind of a classic story here of a child who has broken a valuable. And as a parent, you immediately react by getting angry or perhaps yelling or upsetting the child and yourself. And this worsens the relationship between you and your child, but it also doesn't make anything better. But if you notice your reaction as anger, and you pause and you take a breath and you consider everything, your first response really is to see if your child's okay. and if there's, if they're hurt or scared. And then you realize that the object is broken, it's no longer there, and you calmly talk about how you can avoid this mistake in the future. This is a situation that really focuses on the pause. The pause. There are a ton of situations within AEM in which you have the opportunity to react poorly, specifically around discussing additional scope in future sprints, or performance issues, or bugs and demo expectations. These are probably the three most prevalent areas where you're bound to have an awkward conversation or two. And if you react to something poorly in a meeting with a lot of people, you lose a little bit of rapport. And building it up again and maintaining it after that is much more difficult. Again, this is true of any project, but it's especially true of a project that has so many different players. So how can we avoid that? Well, I think in general, illustrating and being able to explain yourself in most situations is critical. And each role on a project, whether you're a developer or project manager or anyone else on the project, has specific things that they can do. As a developer, you should always be able to explain your reasoning behind a specific code decision or pattern. It's very critical that when you're challenged, you don't take that challenge defensively, but you present an argument about why you feel you did what you did. And oftentimes this is received much better than expected. As a project manager, you can be strategic about enhancements, and you collaborate with the architect at all times to establish the impact. And by that I mean, a lot of times there's a disconnect between adding additional scope that may not take that long versus something that may impact significant other development that's already been going on. So it's important that a project manager and a development team are always on the same page in assessing that impact. And then for everyone, mistakes will always be made. There will always be scope that's overcommitted or overcommitting to scope, and there'll always be a development task that takes longer or needs to be refactored because new information came later on. But it's most important to learn from each of these tasks and move on to the next, because there's really nothing else we can do. And many projects that I've seen personally that have gone south have been in one meeting. You can usually point to a meeting or two meetings where there was a lot of negativity based on a decision that was made, either based on an assumption or based on simply just a poor decision. And these are things that you can very easily avoid as part of a multi-month project. But the single best way to kill an AEM project is to completely introduce complexity. Complexity is probably the killer of more projects, especially software, than I've seen any other thing take responsibility for. If you've heard of Rube Goldberg, which I'm sure you have, then you understand what I mean. Oftentimes when you're hired to work on an AEM project, you're considered an expert or a subject matter expert. And it's often easy to associate complexity with cleverness. And as an expert, you need to define a solution or architect a grand solution to a problem that may not require a grand solution. And this is really important to understand as a partner. There are some pretty robust frameworks that Adobe has provided within AEM. And adding value doesn't always mean creating new functionality. It might mean extending something that's there, or utilizing something that's there and focusing your effort on something else. This has been true on a lot of our projects, especially more recently, where we try and drill home the fact that user experience, especially for authors, is generally the best investment you can make as part of an AEM project. So oftentimes we recommend that you skip the custom user experience changes or core product overlays and use more of the budget on an authoring experience. In other words, don't reinvent the wheel, use as much of the wheel as possible and use it for as many purposes as you can. But even going further, there's some aspects from a more technical perspective that you can use to ensure that you're not introducing complexity. Oftentimes, as a developer, you get caught up in what exactly you're doing in that one task, and you're not able to see all the tasks around you. So enforcing coding standards that make onboarding straightforward and effective is very important. By that I mean, as you add resources to a project, it shouldn't be extremely difficult to get a new person up to speed, especially when there are such modular components within AEM that you can utilize and expand upon for a common library across projects or across projects within a specific environment. Encouraging developers to peer review code before formal code reviews is also really, really important. Peer review, sometimes, again, second set of eyes is probably some of the best advice I think, and this is very true in terms of complexity. There was one time early on in my career where I spent the better part of a month essentially creating my own inherited paragraph system, which comes with AEM. But I wasn't fully informed about what needed to be done and what was there for me. And this is something I had to learn the hard way by eating pizza at 2 a.m. trying to figure out how Adobe already did something. So this is something that I think I see a lot, and it's something, again, that you can easily prepare for. And finally, in terms of complexity, in college, one of my professors as a freshman told me something that I never forgot. And he said that you should never let edge cases win. And by that, I think he meant that there are always going to be the 0.1% of a project where you are looking at something that only happens once a year or only needs to happen once a day, and you let that dominate your strategy for implementation. And this gets in the way of utilizing common libraries and utilizing the frameworks that Adobe provides. And it also tanks budgets and tanks rapport when you're talking about conveying delays in a project to an end user or to a stakeholder. So I would say that edge cases in general and complexity can by far tank a project more than any other piece of a timeline of a project. So in summary, deprioritizing training, foregoing transparency, embracing bureaucratic inertia, reacting without responding, and introducing complexity are the 5 ways that will make someone not want to work with you ever again on an AEM project.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul.